In a small town, beneath a gray, overcast sky, mourners gathered to say goodbye to a beloved woman, Eleanor. But as the priest spoke of her kindness, a strange, unsettling sight emerged. From the forest, a massive bear slowly walked toward the grave, its eyes fixed on the wooden coffin. The crowd froze in shock and confusion as the bear, far from being aggressive, lay beside the grave, its sorrowful eyes never leaving the woman it had once known. No one could understand why the bear stayed, but deep in their hearts, they all knew this was no ordinary creature. The bear's presence was enough to silence the crowd, eyes wide with disbelief. The mourners watched as the massive creature laid itself beside Eleanor's coffin, its massive body pressing gently into the damp earth. It was an odd, almost surreal sight, one that no one had expected to witness in the middle of such a sorrowful event. The bear did not growl, nor did it seem aggressive in any way. Its eyes were filled with a quiet sorrow, as if it, too, mourned the loss of the woman whose funeral they had gathered for. The priest paused, his words faltering as he stood at the pulpit, unsure of how to proceed. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Some of the townspeople stepped back in fear, their instincts telling them to avoid the creature, while others remained rooted to the spot, unsure of what to do. Whispers spread quickly through the crowd, but not a soul dared to approach the bear. It was an animal like no other, massive and powerful, yet it moved with an unexpected gentleness. Its heavy paws left deep imprints in the soft earth as it took another step forward. No one could understand why it was there. The animal's presence at a human funeral, especially one for someone like Eleanor, was almost too much to comprehend. Eleanor had always been different. She had spent her life caring for animals, both wild and domesticated, and had earned the love and respect of the community for her kindness. The stories of her extraordinary connection with the creatures of the forest were whispered among the townsfolk, but most of them had always been dismissed as mere tall tales. The sight of the bear, however, standing like a solemn guardian beside her grave, was a stark reminder that some stories were more than just legends. The bear's attention remained unwavering, its gaze fixed on the coffin as if it was waiting for something. A few brave souls, fueled by curiosity, took hesitant steps toward it. They observed the creature closely, its thick, matted fur, its enormous paws, and the deep, sorrowful expression in its dark eyes. There was no aggression, no threat. It simply seemed to be there, as though it understood the gravity of the moment in a way the humans could not. As the ceremony continued in a hushed tone, one of the older townsfolk, Mrs. Harris, whispered to a neighbor, "That's Bruno, the bear Eleanor saved when he was just a cub." Her voice trembled with emotion, the weight of the memory hanging heavy in the air. Bruno. The name echoed in the minds of the older generation. They remembered the stories, now more vivid than ever. Years ago, Eleanor had found the young cub, abandoned and alone after his mother had been killed by poachers. She had nursed him back to health, raised him, and eventually released him back into the wild. It had been one of the many selfless acts of kindness she had done over the years, but Bruno had never truly left her. As time passed, Bruno had become a part of the forest, but he had always kept a watchful eye on Eleanor, returning now and then to visit the woman who had saved his life. He would leave tracks in the dirt near her cabin, and sometimes people would spot him from a distance, lurking at the edge of the woods. Now, at the funeral, Bruno had returned, but not for a casual visit. He had come to mourn. The townspeople were torn between fear and awe. Some were shaken by the sight of this wild animal lying so close to Eleanor's final resting place, while others understood that this was no coincidence. This was a bond that transcended the boundaries of species. Bruno had been more than just an animal to Eleanor. He had been her companion, her friend, and in some ways, her family. The crowd slowly began to disperse as the ceremony came to a close, but Bruno did not move. He remained beside the grave, still and silent, as if in deep mourning. The sun began to set, casting long shadows over the cemetery, and the temperature dropped with the encroaching night. Yet the bear did not stir. It lay there in vigil, guarding Eleanor's resting place. It was as though Bruno understood that even in death, Eleanor needed protection, just as she had protected him all those years ago. As the hours passed, the cemetery grew quieter, but Bruno's vigil never wavered. The last of the mourners had left, and even the gravediggers had begun to pack up, unsure of what to make of the scene. The bear's refusal to leave was unsettling for some, yet there was something deeply moving about it. Bruno's presence wasn't just a display of grief. It was a silent testament to the bond between him and Eleanor, a bond that had withstood time and distance. And now it seemed even death. By the next morning, Bruno was still there, his massive frame stretched out beside the grave. A few early risers, mostly farmers heading into town for their daily routines, slowed as they passed the cemetery, staring in awe at the sight. The bear's mournful gaze never left the grave, and the air was thick with tension as whispers began to spread through the town. People speculated about the bear's behavior. Some were afraid. "We should call animal control," one of the town's men said, his voice low with worry. "What if he turns violent? He's too close to that grave." Others, however, felt something entirely different. "He's just grieving," said a soft voice from the back. "It's like he understands." No one could deny the strange connection between the bear and Eleanor. The townsfolk who had known her for years whispered about the bond she had shared with animals, her deep empathy for creatures both great and small. Some said that animals could sense things humans couldn't. Perhaps Bruno had sensed Eleanor's passing before anyone else had. Or perhaps he knew something deeper, something the rest of the town couldn't understand. Dr. Harrison, the town's physician, had known Eleanor for most of his life. He had seen her strong and full of life, always helping others, always surrounded by animals that seemed to gravitate toward her. But what unsettled him was how sudden her death had been. Eleanor had been in good health, full of energy, yet one morning she was simply gone. There had been no signs of illness, no warning. It had been an unexplainable, almost unnatural death. Dr. Harrison had seen enough in his years of practice to know that something didn't sit right with her passing. And then there was Bruno. The bear's unwavering presence at her grave made the doctor uneasy. There was a deep instinct within him, one he couldn't ignore, that told him this was no ordinary display of grief. Bruno wasn't just mourning, he was waiting. It was as if the bear knew something that no one else had figured out yet. As the days wore on, the town's people began to grow restless. Some continued to visit the cemetery, leaving food and water for Bruno, though he ignored it all. He seemed impervious to the world around him, his mind and heart fixed entirely on the grave. His sorrow was palpable, but so was his determination. He would not leave, not until he had paid his respects and perhaps, just perhaps, uncovered the truth behind Eleanor's death. Meanwhile, speculation spread like wildfire. She was too young to die, people whispered. Something isn't right. And as the days turned into a week, the town's physician, Dr. Harrison, became more convinced than ever that something was wrong. He couldn't ignore the strange feeling that had settled in his chest ever since Eleanor's death. The more he thought about it, the more certain he became that he needed to investigate further. A grave examination was not something taken lightly, and disturbing a resting body was seen by many as a deeply disrespectful act. But Dr. Harrison knew it had to be done. He had to know if there was something that had caused Eleanor's sudden death, something hidden beneath the surface. His suspicions were growing, and they weren't going to rest until he could find the answers. As Bruno remained by Eleanor's grave, unmoving and steadfast, the town was divided. Some feared for their safety, worried that the bear might pose a threat if it was left alone for too long. Others, however, felt a deep respect for the animal and the bond it shared with Eleanor. They saw Bruno's presence as a kind of guardian, a protector of sorts, someone who had come to watch over the woman who had once saved him, even in death. It wasn't long before Dr. Harrison found an ally in the mayor, a practical man who had initially been hesitant about disturbing the grave. Yet, after much discussion and growing unease among the townspeople, the mayor agreed to allow an investigation into Eleanor's cause of death. The entire town had grown increasingly curious, and as the whispers grew louder, They knew it was time to uncover the truth. The next morning, Dr. Harrison and a small team of officials arrived at the cemetery, ready to begin their investigation. Bruno, as he had done every day since Eleanor's funeral, lay next to the grave, his body still and unmoving. His eyes followed them, but he made no move to stop them. The air was thick with tension as the wooden coffin was carefully lifted from the grave. Bruno's eyes widened, his massive form tensing in the slightest, but he did not rise to intervene. It was as if he understood that the truth needed to come to light. The question now was, what would they uncover? What had happened to Eleanor? As the wooden coffin was gently lifted from the grave, the crowd held its breath. The tension in the air was almost unbearable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Even Bruno, who had been so vigilant, seemed to hold his own breath as he lay there, his dark eyes locked onto the proceedings with an intensity that only added to the gravity of the moment. The doctor, his heart pounding, slowly approached the coffin. He knew that what was about to happen would reveal secrets that had been buried with Eleanor, secrets that, if uncovered, would change everything. Dr. Harrison stood still for a moment, eyes scanning the faces of the gathered townspeople. Many of them looked uneasy, torn between the need for answers and the reverence they felt for the woman who had meant so much to them. The air was thick with the unspoken fear that whatever they might find would somehow dishonor Eleanor's memory. Yet, at the same time, they couldn't ignore the nagging doubt that had been growing ever since her death. How could someone so full of life, someone so deeply connected to the community, be taken so suddenly without any warning? Dr. Harrison, the mayor said quietly, his voice betraying his own anxiety. Are you sure we should be doing this? This feels wrong. The doctor glanced at the mayor, his face set in a determined line. I know this is difficult, but Eleanor's passing doesn't add up. There's something we're missing. If there's even a chance that she didn't die of natural causes, we have to find out. For her, and for the truth. With a deep breath, the doctor motioned for the team to proceed. The lid of the coffin was slowly removed, revealing Eleanor's body, still pristine in its final resting place. Her peaceful expression, the soft lines of her face untouched by the ravages of time, remained the same as when she was first laid to rest. The townspeople stood in silence, their eyes filled with both sorrow and curiosity. The bear, still lying at the edge of the grave, let out a soft huff, as if sensing the importance of the moment. At first glance, everything appeared normal. Eleanor's hands rested gently on her chest, her fingers curled in a final, serene gesture. There were no marks, no signs of struggle. But as Dr. Harrison began his examination, something didn't feel right. He checked her neck, her chest, and her hands, meticulously searching for any hint of foul play. His eyes narrowed as he moved to her lips, noticing something faint, a strange discoloration just beneath her skin. The doctor's heart skipped a beat. He gently lifted the fabric around Eleanor's neck, revealing the faintest mark, a subtle discoloration that had been hidden from the casual observer. It was barely visible, but to someone trained to spot such things, it was enough. His breath caught in his throat as the weight of the discovery settled over him. This was not the natural death of an elderly woman. It was something else, something deliberate. Poison, he muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible as his fingers traced the mark on her skin. The realization hit like a bolt of lightning. Eleanor hadn't died peacefully in her sleep. She had been poisoned. The town gasped in disbelief as Dr. Harrison turned to the mayor, his face grim with certainty. She didn't die of natural causes, the doctor repeated, his voice steady despite the shock in his chest. This is poisoning. Someone wanted her dead. The mayor's face paled. His gaze shifted from the doctor to the crowd, as if hoping that somehow the truth would be different, that it would turn out to be a terrible mistake. But deep down, he knew Dr. Harrison wouldn't say such a thing lightly. The evidence was clear. Eleanor had been taken from them, and the loss felt even more tragic now that it was clear that someone in their own town had played a role in her death. Dr. Harrison's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. Who would want to harm Eleanor? Who could possibly wish for her to be taken from them so suddenly? She had no enemies, at least not that anyone knew of. She had lived a life of quiet service to both the animals and the people of the town. The idea that anyone could want her gone was unfathomable. But then, as the shock began to settle, the pieces started to fall into place. The strange connection Eleanor had with animals, her isolation from the rest of society, her refusal to part with the land she had cherished, all of it pointed to something far more sinister. Eleanor had kept her land close to her heart. She had fiercely protected it from developers and outsiders who wanted to turn it into something else. But now, there were whispers in town that developers had been eyeing the land for years, and they knew that if Eleanor were to pass away, they could finally have access to it. As the mayor and Dr. Harrison exchanged a glance, the implications were clear. Someone had wanted to get rid of Eleanor, and with her gone, the land would become available for sale. The question was, who would stand to gain the most from her death? Meanwhile, Bruno had not moved. His presence, although unnerving to some, was a source of silent strength for others. He had known, in some way, what the people around him had not. He had come to say goodbye. Yes, but perhaps he had also come to ensure that the truth would be uncovered. The bear's gaze never wavered, as if he, too, understood the weight of the discovery. He lay still, watching with unwavering patience as the town's secrets began to unfold before them. As Dr. Harrison and the mayor stood over Eleanor's body, the weight of their discovery settled heavily on the town. The idea that she had been poisoned seemed almost too much to bear. Eleanor had been a woman of kindness, selflessness, and love. She had dedicated her life to helping both animals and people, never asking for anything in return. Yet, someone had stolen that life from her, and now, that person was still out there. The air was thick with tension as the town's people began to murmur among themselves, their fear and disbelief growing with each passing moment. It was one thing to suspect foul play, but to have it confirmed so violently, so suddenly, was another matter entirely. Dr. Harrison's voice broke through the rising hum of whispers, quiet but firm. "We need to find out who did this. We owe it to Eleanor and to Bruno." The mayor nodded, his face a mask of grim determination. The discovery of the poison, while unsettling, was only the beginning. Now came the hard part, the investigation. Who had the motive to harm Eleanor, and why? As the team began to examine Eleanor's cabin, searching for clues that might lead them to the culprit, the townspeople's suspicions grew. Eleanor had been so careful about her life and her land. She had been fiercely protective of her sanctuary, and yet now it seemed that someone had been watching, waiting for the moment when she would no longer stand in their way. The more they thought about it, the more they realized that Eleanor's dedication to her land could have made her a target. But who could have done such a thing? There were no obvious suspects. Eleanor had no known enemies, at least not among the people who had known her well. She had spent her days quietly, living a life that was largely free from conflict. Yet, as they searched her cabin, something strange began to surface. In a drawer tucked away in the back of the kitchen, the sheriff found a small, old teacup. Its surface was chipped and worn, but it was the faint, dried residue along its rim that caught Dr. Harrison's attention. He stepped closer, inspecting the cup with growing suspicion. There was something about it that felt wrong, as if it held the key to the mystery they were trying to solve. "This," Dr. Harrison said quietly, "needs to be tested." The sheriff nodded and immediately began making arrangements for the teacup to be analyzed. If there was poison in it, it would be the link they needed to understand who had caused Eleanor's death. As they continued to sift through Eleanor's belongings, the townspeople began to piece together a new theory. Some of them had heard rumors about Eleanor's distant relatives. There were people who rarely came to town, but when they did, it was often because of her land. Eleanor had always refused to part with it, even though it was valuable. For years, she had kept it for herself, ensuring that it would be a sanctuary for the animals she loved. But now, whispers began to circulate. What if one of her relatives had been desperate enough to harm her, hoping to claim her land for themselves? As the search for answers continued, another clue emerged. The town's clerk had been going through old records when he stumbled upon something strange. Eleanor had owned far more land than anyone had realized. A large parcel, passed down through generations, and never mentioned much in conversation. But recently, there had been talks of developers wanting to buy up land in the area. The potential fortune that could be made from the sale was considerable, and it wasn't difficult to imagine how someone with an interest in Eleanor's estate might have wanted to expedite her death. The timing of Eleanor's death, just before her will could be finalized, seemed more than suspicious. And as they dug deeper into her estate, they found that Eleanor had left everything to charity, ensuring that her land would never be sold or developed. But there was one detail that stood out to the investigator: her distant relatives. They had been cut out of her will entirely. She had severed ties with them years ago, and now they were the ones showing the most interest in her passing. It couldn't be a coincidence, Dr. Harrison muttered as he pieced together the timeline. Someone wanted that land, and Eleanor was standing in their way. As the investigation progressed, they learned more about these relatives. A distant cousin named Richard had shown up in town just days before Eleanor's death. A neighbor had seen him near her cabin late one evening. Others recalled overhearing conversations about getting what was owed to them. These small details seemed insignificant at first, but now they were starting to paint a disturbing picture. Richard was questioned, but at first he denied everything. He seemed nervous, perhaps even guilty, but his lies began to unravel quickly. Witnesses had placed him near Eleanor's home in the days leading up to her death, and further investigation revealed that he had been seeking legal advice about her estate just days before she died. He had even been asking about the possibility of selling the land if he were to inherit it. The truth hit like a hammer. Richard had poisoned Eleanor, hoping to inherit her land before she could finalize her will. He had acted out of greed, taking a life to satisfy his own desires. And now, as the townspeople began to put the pieces together, they realized that the bear, Bruno, had known all along. Bruno's vigil had not been a simple act of mourning. He had been waiting for the truth to come to light. And now, with Richard's arrest, the mystery was finally solved. The revelation of Richard's guilt sent shockwaves through the town. The thought that one of Eleanor's own relatives could be responsible for her death was almost too much to bear. But even as the truth was uncovered, there was still a sense of unease hanging over the town. Eleanor had been a woman of extraordinary kindness, and the idea that someone could take her life for something as selfish as land was deeply unsettling. Richard's arrest brought a sense of justice, but it did little to ease the sorrow that still gripped the community. The townspeople, though relieved to know the truth, struggled with the knowledge that such a betrayal had taken place in their own midst. The land that Eleanor had fought so hard to protect, to keep safe for the animals she loved, was now secure. But the loss of the woman who had given so much to the world was a wound that would never fully heal. As for Bruno, the bear who had stood watch by Eleanor's grave for days, his role in the town's story was far from over. When Richard was taken into custody, Bruno remained by the grave, as though he, too, had been waiting for this moment. His solemn vigil had not just been an act of mourning. It had been a call for justice. And now, as the sun rose higher in the sky and the town began to heal, something changed within the bear. He stood up, his massive form rising from the ground like a silent sentinel. For the first time in days, he looked at the crowd, his eyes filled with something that resembled peace. Then, without a word, Bruno turned and walked toward the forest, his steps steady and sure. The town watched in awe as the bear disappeared into the trees, as if his job was done. Eleanor had been avenged, and the sanctuary she had fought so hard to protect would remain untouched, a lasting tribute to her love and devotion. In the weeks that followed, the town came together to honor Eleanor's memory. The sanctuary was completed in her name, a place where animals could roam freely, safe from harm. The land that had once been a source of conflict was now a symbol of peace and protection. And as people visited the sanctuary, they whispered stories of Eleanor and Bruno, of a bond that had transcended the boundaries of species, of loyalty and love that no one could ever fully explain. Though Bruno was never seen again in town, His presence was felt in every corner of the sanctuary. Some believed he had returned to the deep woods, back to the life Eleanor had once hoped for him. Others felt that, in some quiet corner of the world, Bruno continued to watch over her, guarding her legacy. In the end, the story of Eleanor and Bruno was not just about a woman and a bear. It was about the enduring power of love and loyalty, about how, even in the face of betrayal and loss, there are bonds that cannot be broken. The town would never forget the bear who had mourned a woman's passing, who had stood vigil beside her grave until the truth was revealed, and who had ensured that her memory would live on forever.